This meeting is being recorded.
All right, there we go. All right. So everyone, welcome to the April 2023 5 miles. Oh, there's another one. A couple more. And I think I've got everyone in. More jump on in, which is good. It's a good problem to have. So welcome to the April 2023 5 miles from anywhere meeting. As you've heard me say many a time, we are an official science society of the BSI. We meet the first Saturday of the month pretty regularly, although we do sometimes take a hiatus in the summer. And we'll talk a little bit about that today, because I don't think we'll have as long a hiatus this year. Okay. All right. And if I'm going to mute everyone who's not me, just because I'm going to start talking here. There we go. All right. So let me share screen. Okay. So let's get started. All right, so for today, as always, we will start with announcements. No one had sent me an announcement, but I know there's quite a bit coming up for Sherlock Holmes events and conferences. So in a little bit, I'll give everyone a chance to unmute to kind of let us know about any upcoming events. Okay, then I'll get into my talk, which is, should the canon be considered literature? And I'll kind of show how the answer might not be as simple as we think, okay? Then I'll have some discussion, because I think this will be a bit of a controversial topic, especially with some of my answers, which is good, okay? And then that will wrap it up for today. All right, so announcements, and this is kind of, the first one's kind of where we started, where Jerry was just talking about, but we have the first virtual meeting of the PSI, the Parade Street Irregulars. And that is going to be Saturday, June 3rd at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So if you want to deal with me twice that day, you certainly can. Okay. There will be a talk on solar ponds, and the PSI investitures will be announced, and all are welcome to attend the meeting. If interested in attending, please email me at derrick@belangerbooks.com, and I really look forward to it. And George is on the meeting right now. George, do you want to add anything to what I said? I guess not. I'll take that as a no. But I really think it'll be a fun meeting, and I'll have more about it at next month's meeting, a little bit more details about it. But save the date if you're interested in joining us. All right, another Solar Ponds announcement. The Solar Ponds Discussion Group, a Science Society of the PSI, meets Thursday, April 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. They meet over the Solar Ponds Facebook group. And if you're interested, you could just click on that link or copy that link down and join the group. And it's done in kind of a fun way, or an interesting way. It's not like us chatting away here. It's done just through text messaging over Facebook. That's how we do the discussion. So it's fun. It's easy to kind of do something else while you're doing it, but definitely a cool group if you're interested. And they are reading the story of the late Mr. Faversham, because it's the second story. And if you go to the group, I actually posted a link from the radio drama that the Edge Ensemble Theater did this past summer of it. So, I mean, there's lots of ways you could interact with that story. So if you're interested, you could also email me, and if you want a PDF of the story, I'm happy to share it with you. Okay, one last thing from me. I will be speaking at the Dr. Watson's Neglected Patients, Mrs. Hudson's Tea, at the Denver Women's Press Club, which is May 21st in the afternoon. I don't think we've set an official time yet, but I'll be talking about my story that's in Sherlock Holmes' A Detective Life, as well as some different chronologies of Holmes, and where Shakespeare fits in the canon. So that will be my talk at that. I'm also be talking about my story, The Misquoted Macbeth, which was just selected by the Mysterious Press to be one of the 2023 mysteries of the year. So I was real excited about that. I'll talk a little about how that came about. Larry Feldman, you're on here. Did I miss anything about the tea? Do we have a specific time yet?
Hold on. Okay. Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
It's a different
All right.
subcommittee that handles that than mine.
Okay. Gotcha. I just thought I'd ask if you knew, but I'll ask tomorrow. And
I don't know,
again,
but
I'll
they're
let you all
fun.
know if anyone's in the Denver metro area would like to come. It's a lot of fun. So
It is.
cool. Thank you. All right. I think that's my last announcement. This is probably quite a few people have other announcements. So if you have an announcement, I'm actually going to stop sharing for a second so that I can see everybody. And I see Shayna's got her hand up. Shayna, what's your announcement?
Hi, hopefully a lot of you have already received this email, but just a reminder that the Ash Spring Luncheon is coming up. That is May 13th. So save the date.
Thank you. And that's in person, right? We're back to in person, Shayna?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Steve.
Hi, 3 quick announcements for the crew of the Bark Lone Star. Tomorrow we have our monthly meeting at 1 o'clock Central, and Tom Bridges will be giving a talk on the curious incident of the telephone in the canon, which we're looking forward to that. And then we will have our next meeting on May 5th, I believe, the first Sunday. And that one I'm really looking forward to. Daniel Stashower, who is one of the preeminent biographers, will be talking about how did Doyle really feel about Sherlock Holmes throughout his life. So I think that'll be wonderful. And then we are holding, obviously, our conference at the end of May, the 26th and 27th. And y'all are still welcome to come to Dallas and see a lot of good things and hear some really wonderful presentations. So you can go to the crew website and register. That's it.
Thank you very much, Steve. And then you also, the brackets for the Final Four home stories. When you said that would be Tuesday, that's going to be finalized, or?
Well, so the last game is Monday, and it goes to all day Monday. So we'll, by Monday night or Tuesday morning, we'll announce the winner of it. So
excellent.
We usually announce it the next morning. We give people until midnight to vote, and I'm not sitting up at midnight to see what the final score is. So. And by the way, if you do want to attend our meeting tomorrow, I will post my email in the chat, and you can just send me an email and I'll send you the information about it.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. All right. And Madeline.
Hello. Just a couple of things really quick. One is that you can now order your own copy of the 2023 Baker Street Almanac. And I do recommend it. And it's not just because my art is in it, but that's a big plus. But it's got something very special inside. And I am really excited about people should be starting to get the first copies, I think, should be starting to be mailed out soon. And I'm really excited about not having to keep this secret anymore. So there's that. And also just a quick plug for my podcast, Dynamics of a Podcast, because this is like shaping up to be a really big year for us. We've got some really exciting things coming up. We're going to be doing a panel at 221 BCon, and after that, we've hopefully got a couple of interviews. One of them is, if it happens, it's going to be really, really big. And I don't have final confirmation of it yet. But once I do, I am definitely flooding the socials. So, watch this space, dynamicsofapodcast.com.
All right. Thank you, Maddie. And if you have an announcement, make sure if just we don't miss it, please email me and I can email it out to the group as well. Okay. That's very
One more, Derek.
Yeah, I see it, Tom. Don't worry. And in the almanac, there is a write-up on the 5 miles meetings from last year. So we're all in it too. So very cool. Thank you, Maddie. All right, Tom, my friend, what you got?
Real quick, my new book, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, 10 Steps from Baker Street, has had a great month. Probably the best book launch I've ever had. And also in April, there will be a blog tour.
Oh,
There will
cool.
be a different blog post every day in April for that book. There will be interviews with me. There will be doing a guest post. It's all on my website, which is the 3M Detective Agency website, and I'll post that link in the chat.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. In the book has not one but 2 stories that Tom talked about at 5 miles meeting. So and it's a really good book. So I highly recommend it. So thanks, Tom. All right, let us get back. So now, any last announcements before I move on to my talk? All right, here we go. Let the controversy begin. Okay. All right, so here you go. Should the canon be considered literature? Okay. So Sherlock Holmes is considered, and this is a quote from Oxford Bibliographies, the most immediately recognizable character in all of fiction. Okay, that's a direct quote from Oxford. A pretty good source. Scholars, both lay and professional, analyze and write about him in several journals devoted to the detective, as well as those which are broader in literary scope. Museums and exhibitions on the detective exist in Asia, North America, and Europe, to name a few continents. There probably is Australia too. Yet despite the acclaim, the Sherlock Holmes stories are often sidelined by being called merely detective fiction, or nothing more than an early example of the mystery. Is this fair? Should the 56 stories and 4 short novels that make up the canon be considered merely genre writing? Or is there something about them that makes them rise to the level of what we consider literature? Those are the questions I posed for my talk today. And I believe the answer to the questions lies not in the stories themselves necessarily, but in the definition one uses for literature. So, what is literature? Okay, the definition of literature is a debate in and of itself. If you go to any dictionary, whether it be print or online, you'll get several different definitions, and not a single one is quite the same, because I did that. Okay, I looked at like 25 different definitions. For the sake of this talk, let's start with the simplest definition of literature. Okay, that is any work which is written. That, if you look, pretty much every dictionary will have that as one of the definitions. Okay, that's it, just any written work. So if we listen to that definition, well, Doyle or Watson, depending on your perspective, put the canon down. Okay, so therefore, is it literature? Yes. Okay, we're done. I can send you home early. Just kidding. Okay, because I think we could all agree that maybe that definition fits, but that's not the definition, we think of. Okay, it's much too broad. Okay, and this just isn't, when we think of literature, the definition that comes to mind. Okay, so let's look at a second definition. Okay. This one, I like this chart a lot. This chart comes from writers.com. Okay, I like it because it gives us a sense of what is literature, or sometimes you hear the term literary fiction. Okay, and it separates it out from genre fiction. But it also, I like it because it shows where they overlap. Okay, so pulling from this chart, one can create a definition for literature that says it is different from genre fiction because it is character driven with complex 3-dimensional people in the stories, has a strong sense of theme, and uses figurative language. Okay, so it reads well, it sounds good. Lastly, even if it uses some aspects of a genre, the work doesn't neatly fit into a category. This contrasts with genre writing, which is much more plot-based, okay, and often does fit nicely in its specific genre, okay? So I'm going to use this definition for a bit, and looking at this, I'm actually going to step outside of the canon, okay, because I want to look at some examples of Sherlock Holmes, which I think clearly do fit this definition, okay? The first one, which I think is probably the peak of Holmes literature, is A Slight Trick of the Mind by Mitch Cullen, which was made into the film Mr. Holmes, okay? This is a wonderful book. It is just beautifully written. It is probably one of the finest books I've ever read, okay? The story is character driven. It gets in the head of an elderly Holmes suffering from dementia. I mean, it's so cool the way it's set up. It does include some detective work, but the majority of the story is really about Holmes dealing not only with dementia, but with the death of a past client, okay? The scenes where Holmes meditates to deal with the deaths of Watson and Mycroft are some of my favorite scenes in all of literature. They're just beautifully written. And honestly, quite frankly, so is the entire book. And the film actually does a really good job with that particular scene where he's meditating with the rocks, dealing with the deaths of those characters. So those, I think this one doesn't fit neatly in a genre, definitely character focused, character driven, is very well written, beautiful on the page. This one, I think we'd all agree, is literature. Another one, which I just, Brian and I just happened to see this in London, was Sherlock Holmes, The Last Act by David Stuart Davies, which is coming to America pretty soon. It's probably going to be at the Hollywood Fringe Fest pretty soon. It's a one-man play, completely ahead of Holmes. I had a pint with David Stuart Davies when I was in London. We talked about this, and he said the challenge for him was he had to write a one-man Holmes play. He's like, so how do I do that? Because that takes out Watson. Okay, so he had him deal with the death of Watson. Say poor Watson in all these stories doesn't usually survive. Again, it doesn't really fit neatly in a genre. It does kind of give us like the best of the canon with Holmes reflecting on cases, but it also has Holmes dealing with death. It has him, trying to reconcile the fact that his Boswell is gone. It's a really, really well written play, and it is definitely character driven. And I think, this one might have a little more debate than Slight Trick of the Mind, but I would think this one fits with literature. And then lastly, I'm going to bring a more recent one, and I'm glad I see David Markham's on this call because it's one of his stories. But I would say The Unintended Offenses by David Markham, which was in Steel True Blade Straight, the first issue last year, the 2022 annual. I think this is a really good example of literature. He won the Doylean Award for it. It's told from Doyle's point of view, gives a lot of Doyle's inner thoughts. Again, we're dealing with the death of Watson. Apparently, there's a theme in all of these. Poor Watson gets the axe. Poor guy. He always seems dead in these types of stories. It doesn't fit neatly in a genre because a lot of it is just reflections. It's really well. He gets in the head of all three characters, Doyle, Watson, and Holmes, and I think it really kind of it really fleshes the characters out really well. So I think these are very clear examples of Sherlock Holmes as literature. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. While these stories do fit into the definition of literature, okay, does the canon? Now, for this, I'm going to have to say, no, I do not think in this particular definition the canon fits. Now, don't bite my head off quite yet. I can already see some of your expression. Okay. If you recall, looking at the canon as literature depends on the definition, okay? And I actually think this definition is too narrow because there's a very, very, very important aspect of literature that this definition is missing, okay? All right. I mean, honestly, if you look at this definition, it would exclude such works as Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which I think is the epitome of children's literature, okay? I could go on and on. I love Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, okay? And honestly, even some of the works of Shakespeare, I could see someone saying, well, that's not literature. Midsummer Night's Dream is just a fantasy play, okay? With that definition. So I think it's far too narrow, okay, for the definition of literature. So what's missing, okay? They're missing two pieces. Both the definitions are. One is timelessness, okay? To really be timeless, I think raises things to the level of literature. And I also think importance, okay? Is there something about the work that makes it stand out in all of like, you know, the whole history of literature, of writing? Is there something that makes this stand out, okay? So with that in mind, let's look at a final definition of literature. Excuse me for a second. Oh, there we go. Okay. So what is literature? This is a different definition, okay? And this one is that writing that have excellence of form and expression, okay? So it doesn't just narrow it down to character driven, and are influential or enduring, okay? So that would be what I think is a very important definition of literature, okay? So standing the test of time comes back to where this talk started, okay? And I'd have to say, Red-Headed League, despite Watson's issues with dates, is about as near a perfect story that was ever written, okay? It's one of the most satisfying short stories of all time, and that's just one example, okay? I think Scandal in Bohemia would be another example of just one of those stories that's just flat out perfect, and just fits this, okay? So, so there's that for this, the importance of just a really well-written story. But then there's also the fact of the influence of Holmes, okay? Holmes museums are around the world, okay? The influence on detective fiction is unmistakable, okay? Would we have all of these particular books you see in front of your characters or types of film noir without Holmes, okay? I think Charles Augustus Milverton is really the first kind of noir story, my opinion. Okay, certainly we wouldn't have Nero Wolfe, or most likely we wouldn't. Even Agatha Christie was highly impacted by Doyle's writing. Okay, and then let's just be honest, standing the test of time. Okay, Brian and I were just in London. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is alive and well there. We can both speak about that, okay? There are plaques in enough places about Holmes that it would be very easy for someone to not realize Holmes is a fictional character. And I mean, how many characters in literature have pharmacies named after them, right? I mean, there's just so much to Holmes. I mean, you can go to the Reichenbach Falls and there's a plaque. You can go to the hospital and there's the plaque, and where the, you know, all those different things about Holmes. So wrapping up, okay, I would say, is Holmes literature? Without a shadow of a doubt, I'd say the canon is in fact literature based on the particular definition that doesn't exclude stories that aren't character based and or character driven, and it really focuses on that idea of importance and timelessness. All right, friends. So that's the end of my talk for today. I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for discussion as well. So I will, what I will do is I will leave the slideshow here and have us, I'll talk about that in a minute, actually. There we go. And I will open it up for discussion, okay? Because I purposely wanted to give it some time here. All right, Tom, I see your hand up, and then I see Joanna as well. So Tom and then Joanna.
Okay, that was a very good presentation, Derek. I enjoyed it much. I prefer not to think of literature or not literature. I think that what one can say about Holmes indubitably is that Holmes is a cultural icon. And that is an extraordinary thing. When you think about cultural icons, there are very few of them. I can think of 3 off the top of my head, 2 of which are definitely not literature. One is Holmes, another is Tarzan of the Apes, and a third one is Superman. And
Mickey
we might
Mouse.
throw Batman in there too. These are characters who have a lot of the qualities you've attributed to Holmes. They're enduring. They seem to be timeless because they're all still around in some form or another in the culture. And it's an extraordinary achievement for an author to have created such things. And that's why I, for one, get kind of annoyed when people portray them as different than they were intended to be. I don't like a libertine Sherlock Holmes or an amoral Sherlock Holmes, for example. So I'll stop there. But I think the cultural icon aspect is very important.
All right, thank you, Tom. I will say a little bit more about that after I kind of let everybody jump in here. Joanna, you're next.
I just found myself thinking when you were using the earlier definition where literature is character driven and heavily theme driven and defies genre, that particular set of definitions would make fanfic closer to literature than the original stories, because that's often what drives fic or pastiche writers, is capturing what they want to find out more about the characters and exploring more about those relationships instead of focusing heavily on a plot.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a really good point. I think that's why you saw, like I brought up those 3 particular Holmes pastiches, right? I mean, they were pastiches, but they definitely fit the definition. But you're right. I mean, it's after, and I think that's a really, really good point.
I think it also, if you'll forgive me, one more point.
Sure.
Also reflects our changing expectations of what stories can and should give us as well. I really think what we expect from our literature or reading has changed a lot over the decades. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good point. One of the things I read, this is probably a good point to interject with it, was, when, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, she was just writing a story. She didn't think of genre. When Poe wrote Murders in the Rue Morgue, he didn't think, I'm going to write a detective story. I'm going to write a story and I'm going to make a character that's a detective. They never really separated that. That's a more recent kind of event, probably in the last 100 years or even less. So I think that's a really good point.
Well, those are foundational works. And by definition, foundational works cannot be part of the genre because they're establishing it.
Right. But I guess what I was reading was they just didn't think of genre back then. They just kind of wrote stories. Like they just thought, in terms of fiction or poetry. They didn't really necessarily think of types of stories, even though, maybe they did, but that just wasn't really in the forefront of the mind. So, yeah, no, it's a really good point. All right, Larry, then Sandy, then David.
Okay. Well, again, the thing that makes me think of Holmes as more genre fiction than literature is that it isn't about the development of the character. And the characters don't have like an arc. I mean, they do over the entire canon, perhaps. You can see it. You can see Sherlock Holmes changing over the decades, probably as the author changed over the decades, and its influence changed. But really, Holmes and Watson are always Holmes and Watson. Watson never gets any better. and Holmes never gets any less Holmes, I suppose. I just also want to nominate a couple of other examples of Sherlock Holmes stuff that I have on my Sherlock Holmes pastiche collection that really, I think, comes to the level of literature. One is one that you probably all heard of. It's the Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. And that really is, a piece of literary fiction about about an arc of a character, of a particular character, and really isn't about, there's some mystery aspects to it, and the mystery, what would the word be? Affectations, I guess. But really, it's not about the mystery. It's about something else. It's about characters. And the other one is Michael Chabon's The Final Solution, which is really about the impact of about Holmes trying to deduce a mystery, and the solution to the mystery is Hitler's plans to exterminate the Jews. But can he deduce that fact? And the thing is, because part of the idea is that when Sherlock Holmes's time, it was not conceivable. So it was really particularly difficult for him to deduce, because it was so amazingly terrible that he couldn't really conceive of it. But at the same time, it's kind of a mystery that like dances around it and shows him. And Holmes gets pieces of it, like you get a piece of the elephant. You think it's one thing, and the trunk is another thing, but he can't conceive of the whole thing. And so that's really kind of a very literary book. He's the guy who wrote Cavalier and Clay and other celebrated books, Michael Chabon. So
Yeah,
I just want to.
No, I'm glad you brought those. I had both of those originally in the talk.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I just,
Right.
I just thought Curious Incident was really about an autistic child.
Yeah.
Situation, right? The death of the dog, and so, who killed the dog?
That's right.
But yeah, that's a great one. And Final Solution, I think again, it kind of just fits so much with the others in that Watson, more of an older Holmes kind of place. But yeah, that ending is creepy, and particularly when you find out what the kid's numbers were he was talking.
Yes,
about.
I know. Definitely, that was amazing.
Yeah, no, very, very, very good. Okay, Sandy. Oh, Sandy, you're muted. Oh, Sandy, you're muted.
I
There
would
you
like
go.
to make a case for the Holmes canon being literature, including that Holmes is character driven. All of the stories would not be part of the canon if Holmes were not in them. He is absolutely essential to every single story. And taking the stories as a whole, he does grow, he does change, he does age. I think people would come back to read the stories because Holmes was in them. The stories are very varied, but Holmes isn't, except that he grows. And so, taken as a whole, the canon is literature. Some of the stories may not be, but as a whole, I think they are. They are, rather.
And I was actually thinking about that, Sandy. Are there certain stories, which maybe we can come back to this in a little bit, but are there certain stories which really do rise to that level? And I think like Scandal and Bohemian might be one of those really clear examples, because I do think there's a big change in Holmes in that particular piece. So.
Well, and he finds a villain, and he finds a villain, and he finds a villain, and then he finds someone who has committed a crime, but he thinks is justified. And you suddenly see a piece of his character that's a little bit different. And we keep getting little pieces of his character as we go. So the whole thing is, and it is a series. It isn't that these are not all books with different characters. That character develops, he changes, he ages, and we keep finding things out about him. I think it is about his character as much as about the plot, some of which are a little thin.
Okay. I know again, I think that's another really good point, and I thought about that, but I didn't want to bring that up. I thought it would be good to have one of you. So Sandy, appreciate it. All right, David, and I hope it's okay, David. I mentioned your story in this.
Oh, no, thank you very much for the kind words. I appreciate it. I just wanted to say, to me, it's not about whether it's literature or not literature. The way I approach it is that it's biography. So in everything I do connected with it, it's from playing the game. So.
Yeah, and I think playing the game is actually a really, another thing, again, with the talk, I didn't really have time to bring it up. I think that's a whole other really interesting aspect of Holmes, right? Because we do approach him as a biography. I think that, I think a lot of us here do. And I think that does add a whole other dimension to the timelessness of Holmes, because like lots of people are timeless, it's interesting.
Well, and it's like Tom said, I don't like anything that lifts this biographical character to a different era using the same name, but changing everything else and still acting like it's still Sherlock Holmes. So that's just how I see it.
Sure. All right, Anna.
Hello. Hi. Well, I just wanted to bring up the point of being careful how to characterize it as literature or not when we as educators talk to our students about it, because I have a personal experience when I was in high school, and we had a project in English class to do to choose an author and write about that author and in one of their works. And a fellow student wanted to do Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. And my teacher said, and I remember this vividly, he said, not literary enough, and wouldn't allow him to do it. So me being the impressionable sophomore, I thought, well, then I'm never going to read Sherlock Holmes or Arthur Conan Doyle because he's not literary. And I never read it until I got to be in middle age when I met my husband, and he said, oh no, you are going to love these stories. And he was absolutely right. But, so I think that's where it's really important how we characterize it to students, to young people, whether we say it's literature or not, but maybe say it's important.
That's really interesting, because I would think that same teacher could say the same thing about Shakespeare, right? Oh, that was just written for the masses.
No, he loved Shakespeare.
I bet he did. Yeah, but that's really interesting, because now I think when we look back to that time period, I always hear is like Kipling and Doyle were the big Brit writers around this time. So that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but I think Kipling got a little more credit for being literary at the time.
Yeah, we could talk about that, a little bit later.
Interesting topic. Thanks, Derek.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, Shayna, and then Brian's up.
Hi, so you and Anna actually just basically addressed the issue I was going to bring up, the idea that there is a division between quote unquote great literature and popular literature or popular fiction. I got very worried when you brought up that Venn diagram, because that's such, that is an attitude that I have encountered so many times over the years. Like I think it was last year at G2MB Con, I finally persuaded them to let me do a panel discussion on H.P. Lovecraft. And part of the reason why I did that is while digging around, I found a review in the New Yorker magazine that on his popular fiction, which was written by an editor and critic named Edmund Wilson, who apparently he was a great champion of modernist fiction. He was a big fan of Hemingway, he was a big fan of Dos Passos, did not like genre fiction. And there's an infamous quote of his at the end of this review of Lovecraft where he says, but the Lovecraft cult, I am afraid, is on an even more infantile level than the Baker Street Irregulars and the cult of Sherlock Holmes. And that's like the closing line. I'm like, what the hell, dude? Why are you dragging us into this? And keep in mind, this is also a man who in the 1950s, he wrote a review of the Fellowship of the Ring and dismissed Tolkien as, quote, juvenile trash. Tolkien has little skill at narrative and no instinct for literary form. You know, dude, like I want to call up the shade of Evan Wilson and fist fight him in a Denny's parking lot. And I personally take great glee in the fact that Evan Wilson basically suggested the idea that became the Library of America, where you get kind of definitive versions of the works of American authors in like fine hardcover volumes with, you know, sewn in ribbon markers and like the whole schmeal. And they did a Lovecraft volume, you know, so I like to think of him like wherever he is in the afterlife, fuming about that fact.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Let it be known, everyone, that this topic made Shane pick a fight with a dead man. Oh no, I think that's really good points, and
it's really difficult. Like, where do you draw the line?
Right.
Like, I think most people would say Alexandre Dumas is literature, and Raphael Sabatini is kind of popular fiction, but they both wrote historical romances.
right. No, I think, you know,
Where do you put Charles Dickens? You know, he was a serialized author, but you know, he's not part of the canon.
And that chart I knew. I mean, I think it's kind of a neat little chart. I also think it's the pomposity, you know, of someone like, this is literature and this is not. I would have to agree with you on that. But again, I like it because it gets us having these kinds of discussions.
I mean, it is a great illustration of the concept. I just don't know that it's a valid approach to the issue.
There you go. That's a good way to say it. All right, Brian, and then Lee.
All right. So basically, the fact that you started this off with multiple definitions implies this can never be truly answered. It makes for a great meeting this month, but you cannot answer this if, well, there's this definition, and then there's this definition, and then there's this definition. And I mean, again, as you were saying everything, I'm thinking, wait, you're describing Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster here. For the record, I personally think the canon is literature. Absolutely 100%.
I think you're you know, with like-minded people here, Brian.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a lot of dissent now.
No, again, I think that was why when I really looked at the definition, I was like, you could fit anything in here, you know. I mean, all right, no, that's a good point. All right, Lee.
Brian, you're singing to the choir. Yeah. So anyway, I looked up the definition of literature, and there, as you say, there were many. There are as many definitions as there are people trying to define it. And but a couple of points that my personal feeling is elevates a work to literature are the ideas of an archetype and also a microcosm. So in the creation of the Sherlock Holmes character, I think Doyle raised the detective to an archetype, and it has gone on to be it has gone on to be realized and expanded on and developed into all kinds of different characters and relationships, like, for instance, the bromance and the buddy movie and so on. So that's what I mean by archetype. And then the idea of the microcosm, what I really love about reading these Sherlock Holmes canon books, I haven't read very many pastiches, but the works by Doyle just keep me so fascinated, is that, you know, number one, they really give you a snapshot of the culture at the time and help you to really understand the people of the Edwardian era, the Victorian and Edwardian eras. And then also it is a microcosm of, you know, larger issues, like, for instance, religion. You know, you don't think of Sherlock Holmes as a religious person, but you can see him trying to understand things that are not understandable. And you can see him trying to develop compassion and to understand why there is a disconnect between the, you know, men and the women, this disparity, and also between rich and poor, and so many different areas of human endeavor.
Though that's a very good point. Well, you raised multiple points, but yes, you know, sometimes I see, you know, it brought up, like, you know, Dickens and Doyle both created this wonderful world of London that's unique to their writing, with very unique characters. And so I do sometimes see Doyle and Dickens put together, just like I see sometimes Alice in Wonderland and the canon put together, and that they both, like, the illustrations really brought a lot to the stories. And so I think it's a good point, because now I think all those different pieces are considered literature, and you do get a sense of the time period. If Madeline, you'll be next, but if you haven't had a chance to follow the chat, there's been some really cool comments in there. Margie put a really excellent quote from Doyle about the leather funnel. So I have to say, I think it's interesting that he said the story was spoiled with the poor illustration, because I just think with the Holmes it's the opposite, right? The illustrations really enhanced the writing, which is unique. But that's interesting that he did think he wrote literature, so that's cool. And let's see here. Maddie, sorry, Madeline.
Yeah.
You're up.
It's okay. No, I like what Brian said about, you know, like, this is something that you can't really nail down, because it's like art. You know, there's so much argument about what art is, and that's never going to be resolved. Different people have different definitions of it. Art is definitely more than pretty pictures. And similarly, literature is apparently very tricky to nail down as well. But I do think that it's not. I don't think that it's fair. It's fair to say that genre fiction isn't literature, because I think that a lot of it, as we've been saying, a lot of what we consider classic literature is in some way genre or even genre making. But I mean, you know, think about like something that didn't make the genre, but did, but is certainly the most one of the most popular examples of horror fiction is Dracula. And who would not consider Dracula literature? I mean, so I say, I think that, and I think that your point about Holmes being timeless is a good one. I think that is definitely a good way to try to quantify literature in some way. But yeah, I think that ultimately it is tricky and it is nebulous, and but I definitely think that genre is part of it. I think that you wouldn't have literature without genre. Full stop.
Good points. Good points all around. Okay. Larry, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So we'll go Larry, Walter, and then Tom will get the last word on our discussion. Okay. Go for it, Larry.
Yeah, I just want to, yeah, again, everything everybody said is valid. The thing is, I like what David Markham said about it being biography. What that does, that teases out the idea that Sherlock Holmes is really its own thing. It's not really, it's hard to fit into a category. It is more like establishing a genre. Even though it was not the first mystery and not the first detective fiction, it did establish the conventions of the genre of all kinds of detective stories in all kinds of ways. And Rex Stout, when comparing when comparing Holmes to, let's say, Mr. Pickwick and Dickens, he would say, the difference between Sherlock Holmes and Mr. Pickwick is, when I go to London, I don't expect to see Mr. Pickwick. When I go to London and I go to Baker Street, I expect to see Sherlock Holmes. And somebody says, well, I was there once and I didn't see him. And he goes, well, he was probably out on a case. Then that's the thing. And really, it does feel to us more like a biography than anything else. And you have to be careful, because you want to also say, it's so tempting to argue that it's literature because it's really, really great. Literature is not necessarily better than genre fiction. It's just a different animal. And so, and I do think, I do sympathize with what what they were saying about how he changes over the decades. He does get older, but there's no real story arc in a particular story of Holmes and Watson changing. And so I think literature is a little different than what Sherlock Holmes is. But what it is he's his own thing. He's practically, he's become, very, very, very real in a way that no other fictional character ever has, which is why we like to live with him as being real, which is what the Baker Street regulars like to do when they play the game. So that's all.
All right. Thanks. Thank you, Larry. And again, the debate continues. Okay, Walter.
I would just say, doesn't Sherlock Holmes basically call it literature when he says to Watson, those little romances you write? Isn't there a place where he says something about the little romances? That's all I have to say. I mean, the master said it. It must be so.
There we go. All right. Tom.
Very briefly, I just wanted to answer a question that Madeline posed. My senior English teacher did not consider Dracula literature when I wrote a paper on it. So just as a footnote.
Oh, those wacky English professors, huh?
Yeah, she was an old bag, but never mind.
Well, thank you all. I'm sure we could keep going for quite some time on this topic. And I don't think we would ever come to an ending. We might come to a general agreement, but I don't think we would ever end. I do want to just say a little bit about next month, because I think it'll be a pretty cool topic. So here we are. So next month, Robin Rolls is going to give a talk on murder al fresco in the canon, okay, which is cases where murders are committed in the open air. Okay, and he has a little list of stories and what they kind of mean to the canon. I do also want to give a plug to Robin's, because when Brian and I were in England, we did his walk on called The Man Who Was Accused of Murdering Himself. And where we're standing in this particular picture is the location where Hugh Boone is begging in the Paget illustration. And Robin could explain exactly how it was done. It was really, really cool. This is another picture of him with author Anthony Horowitz, who he gave a tour to as well. So he's a really great tour guide, very, very, very knowledgeable of the canon and locations in London that fit or possibly fit. And I think he'll give a great talk. Other than that, my friends, that wraps up the this month's meeting. We will be back in May. I think it's May 7th is the first Saturday in May. I'll have to look at the calendar, and that's when Robin will give his talk. But thank you all again. This was lovely. I love talks like this, and you know, maybe I'll write an article based on it. So, all right, take care, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you, Derrick. This is great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.
And
And it's us.
yay.
Let me just stop the recording.